Hey guys, welcome back to the Glory Living channel. My name is Hannah and today we are talking about what you can do for a solution to growing your own food even if you don't own any land. Let's go check it out. If you've been around this channel for any given amount of time and watched some of my gardening videos, you may know that we actually rent our house. We don't own a ton of land. We don't own even a little bit of land or anything of property. We are renting. But we have found creative solutions to solve this problem because I love gardening and I love growing food, and I love growing food for our family, and it's important to me. And so we have figured out ways of doing this, and I want to share them with you today. Hopefully give you some encouragement, hopefully give you some creative ideas, hopefully just give you a jumping off point, and so you can feel encouraged wherever you are, whether that's an apartment, whether that's an apartment with nothing but a balcony, something that has a tiny yard, whether you own your house and you just have a small plot of land or a small backyard. I want to give you ideas for how you can grow more food in whatever type of space, whatever type of environment you're in. I want to give you tips and I want to encourage you because you are not alone. Homesteading and gardening is blowing up across America, and a big reason for that is 2020 and everything that happened that year and following. It scared a lot of people into wanting to garden. And you know, I grew up around gardening. I grew up in a house that had a lot more land. I grew up around people who grew food, canned food. My mom made a lot of home scratch meals. We had a well on our property. I have had that mentality since I was a child, and that's something I've always desired, but I understand that a lot of people in the last few years have really had their eyes open to the benefits and the worth of doing that. And so there are a lot of people who want to garden, but it doesn't mean that it changes our financial situations. It doesn't mean it changes where we live, but it does mean that if we want to do those things, we have to learn to make do with what we have and learn contentment and be creative. And if we are determined enough and creative enough, we can find solutions to these problems. So I want to hit on that today. So what can you do? Well, the first half of this video is going to be talking if you really want to grow a large garden, what I would recommend that you do. And the second half of this video is going to be if that is not for you, whether your health doesn't allow it, whether you really don't have any room, whether you really don't think that this tip is going to help and could work for your particular situation, then the second half of this video is more for you. But I will listen to all of it because you never know what opportunities will come your way. So let's talk first. If you have no land or not a lot of space, but you want a very large garden to grow a lot of food, what can you do? Even if you don't want a huge garden, this tip can still help because you may just not have any room in your property. So I want to tell you what we do. Since we do want to grow a lot of our own food, or a lot of food, not necessarily of our own food, just a lot of food, and we don't have that space to do as much as we really desire to, what do? We actually have borrowed land from family, and you can do this too if you have family, friends, neighbors that have property. And I'm not the only person who's doing this sort of thing. This is a solution as well as renting land, which I'll just touch on briefly and I'll go back to the borrowing part. People do rent out land. You can rent land for farming. You can probably rent it for gardening too. If you found somebody who was willing to do that, if that's something you can afford financially, that is not worth it to me financially. It's not like we're trying to raise animals or do that. But that is an option. Some people just rent out land. But I really want to get down to the most affordable and cheapest ways because that's the way my mind goes and that's the way we live our lives. And I think that's more practical to a lot of people. And so you can rent land, but I want to give you some tips on what you can do that's affordable and not going to cost you that type of money. Okay, so returning to the point of borrowing land, right? So we actually have our garden 30 minutes away from our rental house. It's not convenient. It's not always fun. It's not always easy. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I really have to work my tail off during that gardening season to really keep things going. And I have systems in place that have made my life easier so that I don't have to worry about crazy amounts of weeding. I set up in a good spot on the lawn so that there's a slope and it gets good watering. We've been very blessed with both of those things. But I will say that it still makes it very challenging. But it's worth it to me. It's something that's worth it to me. We have friends who moved into a new house, and because of the layout of their yard and things that are in the yard, and it's very wooded, they cannot garden on their land. They don't have, there's no space for them to put a garden, and that was really disappointing to the wife. And so the wife saw that there was a sweet gentleman who lived next door who had room for a garden, and she just went up to him and said, "Hey, would you care if we planted a garden here on this property over here out of your way?" And I think she even had an option where she bartered with him to say, "Hey, you can like take as many vegetables, or we can split it, or do whatever." And he was more than willing to do that. Even where we rent our house, there are people with property behind us that have fruit trees and gardens, and that may be the same for you, that you may have neighbors next to you or down the street that have a love for garden that may give you a spot to grow some food if you don't have any room. A gardener sometimes can be very compassionate to that, and sometimes just people who are not using their land, they're more than willing to share some of theirs with a neighbor, and as long as they think you're going to take care of it, and if they can see your house and you do a good job at taking care of your things, then that's going to be a good selling point to them that you're going to take care of their property and their space. So if you can find a neighbor, a family member, or just another friend who has property. We have friends who have even offered space on their property for us to use for either animals, and I'm sure they would have allowed gardening too. So you never know. If you have connections, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask for help to see if you can borrow land while you're either saving for more land, or whether that's just the way life is for you and that's just the way you want life to be, but you want gardening space. You never know what people will agree to. And there's some other options if you don't own land as well, if you still want some really fresh food and local food. Something else to remember, to do some research for in your area, is that some farmers will do you-pick, and you might even be able to just make a deal out with certain farmers that you could get cheaper food just doing you-pick. You wouldn't have to do any of the work, but you could still get more affordable, fresh, sometimes even organic food that's grown locally that you didn't have to do the work in except for harvesting. There is a blueberry place that is local to us. I mean, not like very close to our house, probably it's a good like 40 minutes away, but this guy does you-pick, and it's fun to do anyways, and it's fun to take your kids to if you want. But he does not spray anything on his blueberries. It's a you-pick blueberry place. He doesn't spray anything on them. He's super low-key about it. Blueberries are really hardy, and you go and pick them, and they were for so cheap, guys. He is selling them like crazy for so cheap. I got like, I don't even know, a couple gallons of blueberries for like, I mean, I don't know if it was like $6 or something like that. It was crazy. It was crazy. Not even comparable to a grocery store price. So much better. And I was able to do that. And as long as you're able to do a little bit of work and don't mind doing that, then there's you-pick options as well. They have those. What farmers had way too many tomatoes this year, and there is actually a you-pick tomato place locally as well. You never know what's around you. Sometimes these types of farmers are not good at marketing. And I'm not trying to be mean, they're just not. And you don't even know they exist, but they're huge, and maybe the people locally do, but maybe people 30 minutes away don't. And you might be able to get really good food that's fresh and locally grown from you, that you don't have room to grow yourself, that you could just outsource to somebody else who's doing you-pick. And that is another great option to keep in mind if you still want locally grown, really fresh produce. That is another option to keep in mind. Okay, so that's my recommendation if you want a larger plot, either finding people who are already growing a ton, like I just said, like with you-pick, renting land, and honestly, what I think is the most ideal is trying to borrow some space from somebody else, whether that's family, whether that's friends, whether those are neighbors, and seeing if you can find somebody who would be willing to share a little bit of space so that you can plant your garden and share the harvest with them, whether that means letting them go out there and pick it, or you make the deal to pick it for them and drop it off on their doorstep, or whether you bring some canned goods at the end of the season, or just invite them over for dinner at the end and cook them a nice meal. You never know. People are way more generous. I know people can be mean. I know people can be selfish, but sometimes people are way more generous than we would imagine. And so don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Don't be afraid if they reject you and say no, okay? Just give it your shot, give it your best shot, and you never know what doors will be open for you. Okay, so we're gonna head outside in a minute. I'm gonna show you some of the things that we are doing and talk about some of the projects that we are working on for this year at our rental house to grow in limited space. But before we do that, I need to share with you a great book. I have shown this book before. Guys, I don't care if you have a quarter of an acre, 10 acres, 100 acres, this is still a helpful book. And it's just called Vertical Gardening, okay? This is by Derek Fell, and this is a great book. He starts off the book by talking about how his passion for gardening started at a very young age of 6 years old when he grew up in England during World War II and learning how to plant a garden with limited space, very small space, a very small part of the grass where the sun shone in their very tiny yard. And it's just very inspiring, but also he teaches you how to grow in small spaces and hits on all sorts of different things you can grow and tips for growing them and different, it's just wonderful. It's a wonderful book full of great pictures, great advice, things you can do, and things that can be a very affordable way of growing trellises. And I'm telling you that if you don't have a lot of space, that growing up instead of out is the way you need to go. So I'm going to show you kind of what we do. You can trellis in buckets, guys. You know, we think about growing tomatoes, and if I say tomato in a garden, a tomato plant in a garden, your first thought is probably going to be like a tomato plant growing up in like a cage. You know, one of the tomato cages, the round tomato cages, not like actually a tomato in a cage, but like the tomato cages, right? And you're going to picture that, and because that's what you saw your grandma growing tomatoes with. And you know what? The fact is, tomatoes are vining. If you left them, they would grow on the ground and vine, just like a cucumber plant. And it would root into the ground. All those little hairs that are on the stem of the tomato, they'll turn into roots if they come into contact with soil. And so if you were to just let them go and you did not trellis them, you did not stake them, you did not grow them up on the cage, they would just crawl on the ground and root down into the ground. That's how a tomato would grow, just like in nature on its own. Not that they don't grow up at all, but as soon as they get heavy, as soon as they start having fruit, they're going to fall to the ground and vine out. And so the thing is that it's natural for us to think, oh, grow tomatoes up, but we don't always think about that with squash. We don't always think about that with cucumbers, but we need to, because if you can learn how to grow them up, you can grow them in a bucket, you can grow them in smaller spaces, and you can get those things off the ground, and you kind of want those off the ground instead of growing those on the ground and having more of a pest issue than you really need to have. And also, like I'm saying, you can grow in smaller spaces. So I'm going to show you some of the things that we do, and there are tons of ways of going about this, but I want to show you some of the things that we do, and I want to recommend to you this book, Vertical Gardening. See if your local library has it, see if you can get it on Kindle or whatever, and just check it out. And any books like it that can inspire you, just do a Google search, vertical gardening, and look at all the ideas that people have for trellises, using sticks, using string, anything that's affordable, all the way up to getting hog fencing, which is much more expensive but lasts for years. It's all about where you're at, what you can afford. But we're gonna go outside and I'm gonna show you what we do with our limited space. Okay, so things are not where they normally are. Normally we have a patio in the front where a lot of our buckets are, and that's where we keep everything. But we are repainting that patio. If you want to see the size of that, I can show you. It's not a pretty sight right now because it was power washed, it needs to be painted. But I have another video about growing in buckets. It's worth checking out, and I can put it right here so you can click on that. But it is another, hopefully, encouragement to you if you don't have a lot of space. But I'm going to show you some of the ways that we grow without much space. Guys, look at all of these buckets, okay? These are all the buckets that we have and that we grow all of our plants in the summer and in the spring. And you can see that we have tons of them. There's our little raised bed garden. But this is one of the ways that we like to grow, and it saves a ton of space. Like I said, it's a little messy right now because we are moving them over for painting on the patio. But what we've shown, and also in another video on how to trellis peas, okay, what you can see here, this is a stick stuck into a bucket with string that is coming all the way up to the top, okay? That is one of the ways that we trellis our peas that we're going to plant really soon. And we have several buckets like that we do that. This is a great way of trellising. There are so many other ways you could trellis in a bucket. You could just get some type of fencing and put it around the exterior of the bucket so it grows up. You could get just the tomato cages. You could do all sorts of different things to grow into the bucket and get the fruit to hang and trellis. So there are so many creative things you can do, but buckets are your friend. I've talked about this in the other video. You can get these buckets for like $1 a piece at Walmart. Let me show you how many buckets we've got growing. And in the springtime, I'm going to give you another tour of this when it's all set up and everything's pretty and the patio's painted and everything's where it's supposed to be, so you can see just how much you can grow in such a limited space. Okay, so right now we are in our little greenhouse that we built that has been such a blessing to us in the cold snaps that we have had, protecting our trees, protecting our blueberry bushes. And I'm just so excited for these to start blooming this year. This will be so exciting. But inside this tiny little space, this greenhouse has to be, it's like 4 by 10, okay? It's not a lot of space. There are 20 blueberry bushes and there are 7 trees. These are all in here right now just to protect them from the cold that we have had, the freezing nights. We had single digits a while ago, and we've just kept them in here because there's still been some really, really chilly nights, and we're waiting for that to pass. But they'll come out here soon and go back onto the patio. Our patio is not ginormous, but we are able to fit these trees on there and several more buckets. And what we do is we grow in our buckets, and we grow in these cloth buckets as well. And we're growing tons of food. So we have 7 fruit trees, 20 blueberry plants. We're about to get 25 strawberry plants, and we'll have several more buckets full of vegetables that we're going to grow in. And I'm going to give you a full head count of how many buckets we'll end up of plants we'll have growing in our small space, but we'll be able to fit most of that on the patio. And I'm going to show you in a few weeks, I'm going to build something that holds the buckets so that they're in a smaller space and off the ground for our strawberries. And guys, you can do so much if you're willing to be creative and just fill your spaces. And so if you don't have even space like we have, like even a patio, if you have a patio, you can fit a lot. We want a lot of fruit. I want a lot of fruit, and fruit takes a long time to get established. So while we're waiting and saving for a house, I want my fruit to get started, and I want it to start being established. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing with the buckets. But guys, we're going to have over 50 buckets growing when we have like no yard space to grow them. But because we have a little spot on the end outside of our carport, and because we have a front patio, I can do a ton. And you would be surprised what you could do with even just like 100 square feet. And so if you have even that much room, you would be so shocked at how much you can grow in buckets. If you're thinking, I do not have that much space, I don't have room to do that, then you need to look at things like this. See this hanging bucket? We picked this up off the side of the road. It had ferns in it. It was from a neighbor's house, and they had ferns growing in it. They gave up on the ferns. They threw them out to the trash, and we picked it up, and we're going to clean them out, and we're going to grow herbs in them this year, and they're going to hang. If you don't have space to set buckets, you probably have space to hang them. Most apartments have even just an overhang coming out of the house, or even in the back where you have a tiny spot where trash goes, or a tiny, tiny little patio. Very small space. But if you're willing to grow vertical, then you can do it. Our cucumbers are grown vertical even in our ginormous yard. Our tomatoes are grown vertical. You can grow squashes vertical. You would be so surprised. Your peas, obviously they love to trellis up. You can grow so much in a bucket as long as you're willing to trellis. If you can be creative with your trellises, you can grow almost anything in a bucket. If I didn't have any room for buckets at all, or any type of hanging thing, I would ask myself, do I have a window? Do you have a window that you could put a window flower box on the outside, open up that window and pick your herbs, water them, do whatever that you want to grow? You could grow a lot in a window box like that. Even if it wasn't super deep, you could grow things like strawberries. You could grow things like herbs. You could grow things like peas. You could grow amazing things that you'd be so surprised that don't have super deep root systems that you could grow in one of those containers. You could truly do this. You could grow them inside, whether it was in a windowsill or even with a grow light over a bucket. There is a gardener on YouTube that is growing potatoes indoors right now, and they're using soil, and they just have something to catch it, like a tray underneath their bucket, and they're doing it. And they don't have to do it, but they're experimenting, and that's the way to do things. Be determined, be creative, and you can figure out ways, even in the smallest of spaces, to grow food. If you feel like you have no space to grow, you would be surprised at how small of a container you can grow herbs in. Things like basil will grow in such a small container, and is really, to me, I feel like such a low-key, low-maintenance herb to try and grow. They make tiny little ways of growing plants that suck up the water. You can find these on Amazon. They can set into a mason jar, and you have your little herb plant in the little soil cup, and it goes down into a mason jar, and you can wick like an old t-shirt or cloth to it, and it'll absorb the water up, and it will grow herbs for you in your windowsill. If you have a sunny windowsill, you can grow something. And if you're thinking, no, I can't grow anything, it's not worth it, and I'll just wait, you will be surprised at how much you will learn at taking care of a plant, even a small one, even just a few of them in your windowsill, and how that will help you develop those skills so that when you're jumping into a bigger garden someday, if you can rent a house, buy some land, you want to build skills now, because things are not going to, sometimes these skills come naturally to people, but for the most part, you're gonna have a lot of failure, and you're gonna fail even in your 10th year, your 20th year, your 50th year of gardening. And so what you need to do is build skills now, and you will get successful so quickly. Give it at least 3 years and you will grow so much. I promise you will grow so much. Just don't give up. Don't be afraid of failure. Don't be embarrassed by your failure, and do something. Grow something. Even if it's just a little herb in a pot in your windowsill, do it, because it is worth it, guys. It is worth it, and it is so exciting and so amazing to pick a fresh herb and put it on your chicken or on your pizza or whatever. To grow something and to eat it, there is something really just amazing about that, and it'll be the most special tomato you ever eat. I really recommend that even if you think it's impossible, be creative and think, where is there sun and where is it accessible to me? And put some contraption there to grow, whether that is a window box that you get from Lowe's that you can hook up that would normally be for flowers. Put a vegetable in there. If you can grow in hanging buckets like they do, once again, with flowers, put herbs in there, put tomatoes in there. You could, if you hung that up and grew tomatoes, you could let it vine down and grow your cherry tomatoes down and pick them while it hangs up high. Don't give up, don't be discouraged. There are so many ways of doing it, but I'm telling you, containers are the way to go. So whether that's inside in a windowsill, outside in a flower box on a windowsill, hanging from a small awning, or whether you do have a patio space, do buckets. If you've never seen, there's these vertical gardening growing tools called green stock. They also sell cheaper and less engineered versions of these at the dollar store. But there are ways, and they're like these tiny little pots, and they stack up, and you can grow like 30 or 40 plants in a super small space. And they don't work for everything, like I wouldn't put tomatoes in something like that, but you could grow lettuces, you could grow strawberries, you could grow things like that, and you would be surprised at, once again, what you can grow in a small space. Right now, because it is still winter, this is just a lot of verbal encouragement, but I wanted to give it because I just did a seed starting video. I just did a video about garden planning 101, but my heart goes out to those who are watching these types of videos and who don't have a lot of space. And I always have compassion because I know that's where I'm at, and I'm hoping someday I won't be there, but at all times in all of history, there are people like you and me who want to garden and want to grow and want to have animals, and there's not a lot of space to do that where we are. And so we have to be creative, we have to figure things out, we have to learn to be content, wait on the Lord, and hope for something in the future that fits our dreams and needs. But for now, what are we going to do with the time that we have here, and how are we going to grow food here, and what are we going to do with what we have? And we're blessed to have more space in our little rental house than maybe others do, but still, we don't have tons of room, and you, like I said, you would be so surprised at what you can grow. Guys, I'm not trying to pull your leg. We're gonna have, I just did the math, we're gonna have 80 buckets out in our house. It's not gonna take up nearly as much room as you think it is. I mean, Lord willing, we'll have that many, full of fruit trees that'll include apple trees, pear trees, cherry tree, peach tree, blueberries, raspberries, a grapevine, tomatoes, cucumbers, things like that that we're going to be growing, our strawberries. And then the leftovers will be vegetables and herbs being grown. Some of those will be hanging, some of those will be on the ground, some of those will be on special holders that will get them off the ground. And I can't wait. Lord willing, we'll give you a great tour in several weeks of what our garden looks like as it gets planted and as our patio gets painted and everything gets put back together where it goes. But in a small space, and I'll have to measure how much square feet of space we'll actually be using for all this, you would be surprised how much you can fill and, have a good aesthetic to it, because sometimes when renting it can be harder. You want everything to still look good. But you will be so surprised at how much you can grow in a small space and using things like buckets, containers, windowsill, flower boxes. Guys, be creative. Don't get discouraged and figure it out for your space. You can do it. If you have a hanging patio, if you have a little balcony, use those railings. You can do so much. I promise you, you can. And guys, If you do, please leave a comment and let us know. I'd love to hear your creative ideas of the things that you're doing. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I know it wasn't much of a tour of what we are doing successfully right now because it's winter. It's so drab outside. It's so cloudy today, unfortunately. But I will in the future, very soon, as soon as our patio is painted and everything set up, I'll show you firsthand so you can see what we do and that it actually does work. And so I want you guys to be encouraged. I want you guys to be inspired. I want your wheels to start turning on how you can truly grow a garden, even with obstacles. Like I said, guys, we do not have room. We have a rental house. We don't have space to grow a huge garden, yet we are growing a lot of food at a family's house. We are still going to grow a lot of food here on our rental property and get a lot of fruit, bushes, and trees established while we're saving for land. We're doing what we can to hit the ground running, so Lord willing, if we can get property someday, we have experience, we've grown skills, and we have some established plans to bring with us. And so that is something that I'm really passionate about, and I want to encourage you in, guys. Do not be afraid to experiment. Do not be afraid to fail. Do not be afraid to try things. Do not be afraid to ask people for help and ask them to share some of what they have been blessed with you. If you can have a little spot to grow a garden, a little bit of an area, and share with them, don't be afraid to jump into these types of ideas, because sometimes we just have to make do with what we have. And that's what we're doing here, and I want to inspire you guys to do that as well. If you are determined and if you are creative enough, you can figure out solutions to these problems. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. I look forward to, in several weeks from now, giving you guys a tour of what we're doing in our rental house so you can see it hopefully pretty and bloomed. Guys, thanks again for watching the video. Please like the video. Please share it with your friends and your family. And as always, please subscribe to the channel. It truly is the best way to support us in creating this content for you. Thank you guys, and until next time, we'll see you soon.